Chapter 20. 2 days later, Sophie sat on a bench in the Tuileries garden, fidgeting with her clothes. Her heart was hummingbirding. Matteo had sent her to sit there, in the dusk, and wait. "I sent word," he had said. "I signalled. They might come, they might not." Who is they? Sophie had watched him scrubbing the mud off snails in a pan of water. He didn't look up at her as he spoke. She had felt herself growing increasingly tight around the chest. "And how long do I wait?" "Maybe 4 hours, starting at dusk." 4 hours? Or 5, to make sure. 5! Waiting is a talent, you have to learn it. Matteo laid each snail he cleaned upside down in front of the fire. He had a row of them. Sophie counted 11. Their shells were mottled and more beautiful than she had realized. Matteo said, "It's like playing the cello." "No, it's not. It will be good for you." "What do I tell Charles? I'm not allowed on the streets. I'll get caught." Just the word caught made Sophie turn cold. "Anything, nothing, whatever you want. Lie to him, it doesn't matter, it will be dark." It did matter, Sophie thought, hugely. But Matteo was a rooftopper, and he had never known what it was like to have to lie to the person who loves you most. Sophie resolved to saying nothing to Charles. It would be better, at any rate, than lying. And she could wear a scarf round her hair. She thought, it's my hair that they're looking out for. And she could perhaps pad out her clothes to make herself look fatter, or slouch to make herself look shorter. All the same, the thought made her ache with fear. She said, "Couldn't you come and keep me company?" From the look Matteo gave her, she might have asked him to eat an unplucked pigeon. "I don't go on the streets ever." "Then couldn't we meet on my rooftop, or yours? Otherwise I might get lost," she said. "Or caught. Please, Matteo. The police here look cruel." "No, they don't like roofs much. They like open spaces." "What do you mean? You said they were rooftoppers." "They are, sort of." "Why won't you just explain?" Matteo shrugged and threw the snails into a pot of boiling broth. "You can never know who will tell. Often the ones who look the safest are worst." "You think I'm going to tell?" Matteo made a face. "It will be fine, you'll see." She had been sitting there for an hour. It hadn't been easy to get out. She had waited in her room for dusk, climbed out onto the rooftop and shinned down the drain pipe. She had left a note for Charles under his door. "Gone to bed early. Don't wake me. Love, S." The thought of him finding her gun was gnawing at her insides. And every time a man in uniform passed, she jumped and bit slithers off the insides of her mouth. Sophie looked about for something to keep her mind off policemen. The park was emptying as it grew dark, and there wasn't much to see, only flower beds, which are boring unless you are allowed to pick the flowers, and sparrows, and beside her on the bench a cheese roll for her dinner. She broke off a corner and tossed it at the sparrows. Behind her a voice spoke. "That won't work. Those sparrows only eat croissants." Sophie whipped round. A girl was sitting on the back of the bench with her feet on the seat. Her blonde hair was inches from Sophie's face, but Sophie hadn't heard a rustle, not a click, not a pigeon's whisper. How did you do that? That's incredible." The girl grinned. "Good evening to you too. You must be Sophie." She slid down to sit next to Sophie. "The birds are very spoilt around here. There's a dove that only eats pain au chocolat." She took the bread from Sophie and instead of throwing it to the pigeons, she bit into it. "Oh, yum! Oh, heaven! I haven't had bread for weeks." "It's stale." Sophie couldn't think of anything better to say. The girl shrugged. She licked the bread to moisten it. "Stale means old, doesn't it? Old is wise. Wise bread. This is Safi. My sister say, bonsoir, Safi." Sophie jumped half an inch. A dark-haired girl was lolling against the bench. The girl said nothing. Sophie said, "But I didn't hear you. How did you do that?" The girl first shrugged. "Practice." The dark girl came and sat on the bench, tight-rolled, almost in her sister's lap. A clock chimed, and a man began to light the street lamps. For the first time, Sophie could see them clearly. Both were small and filthy. The blonde wore a cotton dress. It was greenish brown, but judging by the stitching, Sophie guessed it had once been white. It looked as if someone had deliberately smeared it with grass stains. A beetle was clinging to the hem. Somehow the girl made it look like the richest Chinese silk. "I'm Anastasia," she said. Her accent was odd, Sophie thought. It was French, but there was an odd twang to the vowels. The girl spread out her arms as though she owned the place. "Welcome to Paris." "Thank you, I'm Sophie." "Yes, we established that," said Anastasia. She laid her hand on the arm of her sister. "Safi says welcome also." The dark-haired girl had the face of someone who had seen a lot and wouldn't mind punching most of it. She wore a boy's shirt and a man's pair of trousers, held up at the waist with measuring tape tied in a knot. She had something sticky smeared up one cheek, which might or might not have been blood, but beneath it she was as beautiful as the blonde. Sophie winced with jealousy. The blonde girl smiled. "Matteo said you would be easy to spot. Look out for eyes the colour of candlelight," he said. "Matteo told you?" "Of course, who else?" Sophie narrowed her eyes. "How did he tell you?" "We signal with candlelights. You know, Morse code you call it." "Shush, just for a second." She looked Sophie up and down and then jumped up and circled her to view her from the back, all without any apparent worry of being rude. Sophie tried to keep her face blank. The girl said, "You're very much like he said. He talked about you quite a lot." The other girl raised her eyebrows and said nothing. Unaccountably, Sophie blushed. "What did he say about me?" The girl shook her head. "That's a secret." Sophie scowled. She felt stupid and she looked angrily at the floor. Anastasia said, "It was all interesting and mostly good." The other girl nodded and became more emphatically silent. Sophie tried to smile. Anastasia said, "Safi wanted you to know that she's very excited about meeting you." Safi was hiding it well, Sophie thought, but she only said, "Why?" "Matteo doesn't usually like people, so when he does, it matters." Sophie burned. She ducked behind her hair and tried to think of something to say. "Can I ask you something? You're French, aren't you?" "Of course," said Anastasia, and Safi thumped her chest. Anastasia said, "Vive le français." "Then who taught you to speak English?" "The American tourists." "Really?" Sophie hadn't expected that. "Oh, that was nice of them." "They don't know they're doing it, but they eat in the cafes in the park and sit on the benches and chat, chat, chat." "And you sit on the benches near them?" "No, of course not. The park rangers would start to recognise us. We sit in the trees. They never see us. Americans are not good at seeing things." "Aren't they?" Sophie had never met an American. "The adults aren't anyway. The children are quick-eyed. You've got to be careful of the children. We speak Russian too, and either Italian or Spanish. We are not sure which it is, but we speak it. Matteo speaks German, but not as well as he pretends he can." "And your sisters?" "Yes, Safi is younger, I think," said Anastasia. "At least I think I can remember her not being around, but she can't remember the world without me, so..." This seemed extraordinary to Sophie. She said, "You think Safi is younger? Don't you know how old you are?" Anastasia shrugged. "No, we don't remember having a mother. Neither does Matteo. He keeps saying he's 14, but he forgets it has to go up every year." Anastasia looked Sophie up and down again. There was a straightforwardness in her look Sophie had never seen in the girls at home. She seemed fearless. "How old are you? We're about the same height, aren't we?" Sophie shook her head. "You can't tell that way. I'm tall for my age. You look about 13 to me." "Good, I will be 13. Safi can be... What do you think? 11, 10, maybe?" "Let's say 10, said Anastasia. "I like to be older."